Puberty is a challenging time for anyone. It's a period of rapid physical changes, emotional turbulence, and the search for identity. Now picture going through all of this while gaining 150 pounds in just 1 year. Not because of diet or lifestyle, but as a direct result of a medication prescribed to help you. Meet Russell, who faced this very reality at age 15 when he was prescribed Risperdal for obsessive-compulsive disorder. In today's interview, Russell bravely shares his journey of navigating the profound physical and emotional impact of this medication, the struggle with severe weight gain, and how it led to the development of type 2 diabetes by his early 20s. But this is not just a story about challenges. It's also about resilience, recovery, and the path to reclaiming his life. Stay tuned as we dive into Russell's experience, discuss the broader implications of antipsychotic medications, and explore what we can learn from his journey. And after the interview, we'll be doing an important teaching point on the risks of weight gain and diabetes associated with these medications, so you won't want to miss that. Now, let's hear from Russell. Hi, I'm Dr. Josef Witt-Doerring. It is my pleasure to be joined today by Russell B. Russell B. May be known to some of you because he has a YouTube channel where he talks about his odyssey with various psychiatric medications. Started when he was 13, off when he was 30, and it was a journey that took him all the way up to 400 pounds, and then allowed him to significantly drop weight when he came off all medications. Nearly 10 years ago. So Russell's here today to share his story with us. Russ, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me. Really great to be here, and I really think a lot of your work and your channel, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Yeah, thank you.
So Russ, let's start at the beginning briefly. Just hitting the high points. How did you end up taking psychiatric meds in the first place? What was going on in your life?
Well, I'll give kind of a zoomed out version. Not to zoom in and take up too much time, but really it just kind of started with my parents' divorce when I was 7, and it was just kind of a messy divorce, and ended up being kind of a poison the well situation where, one parent kind of was in a very dark place and kind of tried to villainize the other parent. And in the process kind of also became, a bad person for a while there. And it really did some damage that kind of lasted for a while. And that was a very dark period that really was the buildup to me going on medication. When I was actually age 11 is when I started taking psych drugs. I started taking antidepressant at age 11. And yeah, so just very dark times in the family, just coming from a very dysfunctional family. And just a lot of psychological and emotional, I don't know what you would call it, but just devastation, I think, because of just the state and condition that my parents were in. And around the same time, kind of as a result of that, I developed a gastrointestinal disorder called encopresis. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's where, just for people who aren't familiar, it's where, normally you feel an urge to go to the bathroom, and that would be your solid waste. You feel an urge to go to the bathroom. But with encopresis, instead of going, you hold it in, and so you don't go. As a kid, maybe that limited some of the embarrassment because I was, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old when it was at its worst. But these are some of the things that you have to deal with this disorder. And, it really does tie into just how unstable things were at home. And that was really the genesis of it. I just had a hard time, as a child, I had a hard time managing the unmanageable. And that's really kind of what led me to psychiatric treatment, with my parents or my mom specifically taking me to a psychiatrist. I'm being kind of elusive, I guess, in terms of details, but it was a very dark time, and a lot was said, and some things were said that kind of made me feel unsafe. My brother got the worst of it because he went and lived with my dad, who was in the very dark place. And so my brother got the worst of it. And unfortunately that was something that he never really got over. So without getting into the details of all of that, of everything, that's basically the buildup to me being taken to a psychiatrist. I had reached a point where I was kind of just at night pacing in circles around the foot of my mom's bed. And she needed to go to sleep and go to work the next morning. So it was very problematic. But, I was pacing because of how my stomach felt. It'd been 3 weeks maybe since I'd gone to the bathroom, 4 weeks. I was in horrible pain. My dad was saying horrible things about my mom all the time. It was just a really bad situation. And then on top of that, my mom was dating someone who would become my stepfather. And it was kind of another man coming in who was bringing in a new set of problems. And it was a very bad situation. And so,
Ross, if I were to jump in and ask, so your mom takes you to see a psychiatrist and you're prescribed an antidepressant, I believe. And
yes.
Tell me about that. Was that helpful at the time?
If you were to look at one of those sheets where, what is it, like, I don't know if it's a 1, if it's helpful, and whatever, if it's unhelpful. I don't know, like, you rate it as a patient. I don't know what I would have said as a patient, if it was helpful or not. I feel like as a patient, I usually said things were helpful regardless. But looking back, I don't think it was helpful in the slightest. And part of the reason for that, and this kind of goes back partly to the endocapresis thing, is that what's one of the most common side effects of psych drugs? Constipation. So it actually made one of the problems that I had, that really had a hold on my life. It made it worse. And even the OCD stuff, like not feeling clean, like those kinds of things. Well, I didn't feel clean because I was soiling my underwear, as a kid and all these kinds of things. So it had a very real origin. It wasn't some kind of symptom separate from any real world cause or just simply, the whole chemical imbalance thing. So no, the medications were not helpful. Did they provide some form of relief to my 11-year-old self? Possibly. But to be honest, at that time, what I found most helpful was just going to the psychiatrist who did like psychotherapy, basically in combination with prescribing and medication management. And he was kind of like an ally. And so that was probably the thing that I found most helpful. The medications were just an addition to that at the time, I don't think really did anything. It's kind of how I feel about that.
Walk us forward from there, because I know over the ensuing years you end up accumulating medications. Tell us that story. How did things unfold from there for you?
Well, yeah. So I went from one antidepressant to another. I was on the first drug for about 3 years, and then a new antidepressant was prescribed just to treat depression. The first was to treat OCD symptoms. And then from there, around 14, 15 years old, I actually tried to quit school. And then this kind of kicked off a whole series of events that led to just utter chaos and being hospitalized as a penalty for quitting school. Basically, instead of going to a juvenile detention center, I was sent to a psych ward. And in the psych ward, that was my first exposure to an antipsychotic. It was Mellaril, or, thioridazine. And that I don't know if that influenced my psychiatrist to then say, well, let's keep you on an antipsychotic. But I was put on an antipsychotic shortly after that. And that's when I was put on, I believe, Risperdal at that time. And his reasoning was something to the effect of, you have OCD. His reasoning was, you have OCD. And, when you have these obsessions and compulsions or whatever, like, they're not real. Like, that these are kind of just absurd, but you still kind of respond to them similarly to how someone responds to a delusion. Like, they're real to you in a sense, and you kind of act on them. So he had some kind of logic there that I don't know if I was truly on board with at the time or not, but, I was 15, so it didn't really matter. And so he put me on an antipsychotic, and then that was Risperdal. And then that's when I began gaining the weight. And that's when I gained 150 pounds in 1 year. And I was on Zyprexa somewhere in there too, so it wasn't just Risperdal on its own. But there were, just a number of medication changes going on there.
I don't want to gloss over that because that's really an astounding amount of weight. Um, what is it like to gain 150 pounds in a year?
Oh, it's like, I mean, it's unreal. It's like somebody like surgically installing a quote, fat suit onto your body. And I had no sense of my dimensions. I would go to a restaurant, and you have chairs kind of on either side of you in a little aisle where you can go between the chairs. I would just knock over chairs because I had no sense of how much space that I took up. And so I don't know. I couldn't prepare for it. It was like some kind of like body horror experience, like I was just gaining all this weight and I wasn't me anymore. And it's at that age when you're 15 where people are starting to, develop more dimensions to their social life, starting to take a romantic interest, all these kinds of things. And then I'm just kind of just withdrawing more and more from everything. And the weight really contributed to that. Like I just felt kind of like I had no place in the world. I was just managing at that point. It just felt like I was turning into someone who was just managing not just mental health, but physical health, and just all the things that go along with that. So that's what, it's just like, it was horrible. Yeah. Yeah.
What did the doctors say, when they were seeing you kind of balloon like this? I mean, it takes a while to gain 150 pounds. Was this something that they were talking to you about and concerned about?
Yeah, there was concern. In fact, I was looking at my mom took some pretty decent notes over the years, and I was looking at some notes where she was talking about she told the doctor that I was concerned about the weight gain, horribly depressed over it, and was even suicidal about it. Mm-hmm. And the doctor's reaction was to, go back from 1 milligram of Risperdal up to 2 milligrams. So he communicated his concern, I guess, through the medications by adjusting the medications. I don't really know how he felt personally. I think, that may have been lost on me at the time.
So the way you said it then, and I may be mistaken, it was almost like they increased the medication. You went from 1 to 2.
Yeah, the way that it was worded, It was almost like he had decreased it at one point and then increased it. So basically, it was just like experimenting with the medication to try and find a stabilizing dose. Yeah, yeah.
So walk us forward from there. What happens next in your story? I mean, you've gained 150 pounds at age 15. How heavy are you roughly at that point?
At that point, I was about 330 pounds at that point. Yeah. Okay. So it was a significant amount of weight. Yeah.
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 So what happened next in your story?
Well, what happened next in my story was, that's actually the time when I got sent to a therapeutic residential school. And I ended up being there for about 21, 22 months. And of course, we were given medications at the school. I did end up losing the weight at the school. I got like on a maintenance dose of Geodon and some other medications, Xanax. I think there's a mood stabilizer in there. And I lost the weight at the school, but I had no motivation. I didn't feel like doing anything. But prior to that, I had an interest in video production and things like that as a 14, 15-year-old. But as I got on these antipsychotics, all of that went away. And I just kind of was just basically getting by, surviving. I didn't feel an interest in anything really, and had no goals, no ambition, nothing. So I stayed on all these medications. The psychiatrist at this school did attempt to take me off the medications to see how I would do. And this was when I was probably around 17 years old. But like you would expect, he had no knowledge of de-prescribing, like safe, comfortable de-prescribing. So that was a failure. I had to just go back on the meds. At that point, I'm just going to this school on these medications, no plan for the future. And then eventually I graduated from the school, eventually went home and kind of went right back to living as I'd been living before the school, which was just home all the time. Medications started to go back up again. Weight started to go back up again. And so that's what led to me eventually gaining more weight than I had the first time in my early 20s. And that's where I got up to 400 pounds approximately. And so just a whole other, it's like round two, repeat of the first time, like it's just nothing had been learned. Nothing was really being accomplished. It was just more medication to fix the problems caused by the medication. That's kind of how it felt to me. And certainly now that's how it appears.
And I mean, eventually you come off the medications in your in when you're 30, and I think it takes you some time to get there. How did you get to the point, you're in this low spot, you're 400 pounds, no motivation, kind of withdrawn at home. How did you come out of that place and decide that you needed to come off? Well, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, actually part of it was at that time, I think I'd recently been diagnosed with like ADD or something. This was when I was 24, about to turn 25. So I've been diagnosed with ADD, put on stimulant, I think 2 stimulants eventually, Concerta and Ritalin. Ritalin to take the edge off when the Concerta started wearing off later in the day. And that was the best I'd ever felt on medication, was when I was on, I think it was like 6 different psych drugs. And this was shortly before the taper. That was the best I'd ever felt. And I just had this feeling that if this is as good as it's going to get, I can't keep going. Like, this can't be it. This is not good if this is as good as I've ever felt on all these medications. And then on top of that, I had the weight problem. My family doctor had told me that basically it's just kind of like a heart attack waiting to happen situation. My labs were bad. My diabetes, because I'd had type 2 diabetes off and on, coinciding with these weight gains. It would come back when I'd gained the massive amount of weight. So my diabetes was out of control. And doctor was talking about installing an insulin pump. I was taking the insulin injections in my stomach every day. I was also on a beta blocker, all these other things. So I don't know. I just kind of had this internal, I don't know. I just had this idea. It wasn't an epiphany. It wasn't anything grand. It was just this idea and maybe frustration that this can't be it. There has to be something more than this. And I've got to either, I've got to try to see if there's more or die trying, basically. Because at that point, I really didn't think I was going to make it if I stayed on that course. Yeah. My physical health was going to be the end of me, not my mental health on that track.
How did you even start sort of chipping away at this? Because I know a lot of people, to be in that place, meds for years and years, like 5 of them. How did you just start tackling this problem? Like, how did you decide where to begin? Walk me through that, because it was a big problem that you were facing.
Yeah, like with the taper itself and just starting that process. Well, I lucked out in the sense that the psychiatrist I was seeing at the time, before I had my conversation with him, he had just finished helping his first patient ever do like a proper taper. He still had no idea what he was doing. He told me he didn't know. He had no training in this. He was learning. He was going to learn through me. But I was going to be the second patient that he ever tried to help in a more effective way by stretching out the length of the taper, of the de-prescribing. And so I lucked out in the timing there, because I think he had gotten just enough confidence from helping this other patient, who he said he had just discharged them from his practice. It was so successful. But he said I would be a more difficult case because I'd been on more medication and for longer. So it was actually with his help that I was able to begin that process. Without it, I don't think I could have done it, because I think it would have been, I would have been just completely lost and would have come off everything even faster than I did with him when he took me off way too fast. So I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it on my own. I don't think that would have worked at all. Yeah.
So give us the high points. I know you start tapering when you're around 25 and you're off when you're 30. What's the couple minute version of like how you were able to unwind all of this? What did that look like?
In terms of the recovery, basically, like moving beyond it.
Which medications did you come off? How quickly? How did all of that, and maybe also just how did it feel? coming off so many different things? Like, did you feel better on the way down? Was it hard? Like, what? Tell us about the withdrawal. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The withdrawal began. I had some momentum in the beginning, and then the momentum was lost eventually. But in the beginning, I started to feel like, I guess you could say, almost like when you flick a lighter and you see the sparks. Like there was something in me that could see some little sparks kind of going off. Like maybe there's some vitality, kind of little vitality sparks there. And I could kind of sense that, wait a minute, like I feel like maybe I'm either now coming alive or in the future, I'm going to come alive if I keep doing this. And that's how I felt in the beginning. But I came off the medication so quickly because, again, my doctor had no idea what he was doing, that eventually it all caught up with me. You know, the too fast taper caught up with me. And then that's when I just kind of basically spent most of the 5-year taper in bed. Not just completely sensitized to everything. Like I just couldn't handle anything. And so I did very little during that time. There was some socializing attempts, some attempts to get out, because I lived like a shut-in. I mean, I barely left the house for years, and that even before the taper. So, I was used to just seeing the same 4 walls every day, and that hurt me and it helped me when it came to the taper. But yeah, I started to try to get out more and all those kinds of things later on in my taper, but I was just in such a bad place that I could not come close to sustaining anything. And I would just have to kind of retreat back to the bedroom and the bed. So yeah, it was a really dark time. And my psychiatrist who helped me in the beginning only helped me for about 1.5 years. And then I had to move, and I couldn't get anybody to see me except for just family doctors who wouldn't listen when I would tell them, look, I need 0.5 milligrams of clonazepam instead of 1 or 2 milligrams. And they'd say, no, just take the extra. You just take it, cut it in half, whatever. I couldn't get anybody to believe me or understand me. And as, somebody who's in the middle of coming off all their psych drugs and trying to find a new doctor, it was a mess. And I even tried to see that old doctor who started the process with me. I tried to see him again about 1.5 years later, and he just said he just chose not to see me. So he didn't even help me finish the process, and has no idea that I succeeded. So it actually became a really big mess. And I would say that I didn't really start to see some improvement until the taper was over. And there was a period there where I started to have more of a social life and some things like that. But yeah, that's kind of the very, very quick version of the taper, where it was a mess. I mean, it was a real mess. I didn't know what I was doing. This started back in 2008 when you couldn't just go online and see all these examples of people succeeding. YouTube was only 2 years old in 2008. So, I had no idea. Like, I think Beyond Meds by Monica Cassani was like the one thing that kind of kept me going, because she would post updates and things like that. And I could see there's one other person who's surviving. And that helped me to keep going. But back then it was a very different landscape, when it came to just trying to find other people, other survivors and all that kind of stuff. It was really like leaving the village and kind of wandering through the darkness, basically.
Yeah. And to be disabled like that for so long, like you said, like essentially being a shut-in and such, what was the impact on, was this your mom that was helping you at the time, or was it another family member that was helping look after you?
My mom, yeah. My mom mainly was the one kind of who had helped look after me all those years. Yeah, especially before the taper, but during the taper, she would help, especially financially. Yeah.
And was she supportive of what you were doing? Because sometimes that can be complicated. Family members, they may not fully be on board with it. And what was that like?
It was complicated. I don't think they really knew what to think in the beginning, because I think there was a lot of silence. Well, that's good, that's good. I don't think anybody knew what to think. And when you tell people your goal is to come off your medications, and all you've ever been told and all they've ever been told is that if you need to take these drugs for life, that's kind of where we were back then. Things haven't changed a great deal now. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like I was doing something so unusual. It's like almost like risking certain death or something. Like it was like, I don't think people knew what to think of it. Like, good luck is kind of how it felt at the time. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't until I started showing some signs of improvement over time, over the years, that's when people started to kind of come around. But in the beginning, nobody knew what to think.
Yeah. So you stop Klonopin when you're 30, and I know you had mentioned previously that it was after coming off that you started to feel better. Talk to me a little bit about this process of recovery when you started to feel better. How did you notice that things were getting better? What was it like kind of coming back online? What did it feel like?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that the one thing I knew about not recovery, but about quitting the medication finally, the one thing I knew in advance about that is that I needed to approach that step very carefully, because up to that point, being a mentally ill, medicated person was my identity in a lot of ways. And I was very concerned about how I would be when I got rid of that identity, when I could no longer say I'm on meds. Now I'm off meds. So I knew that I had to approach that part of the journey very carefully, but I didn't really know what to expect beyond that. And so I rushed it a little bit. I moved from the city that I'd been living in to a different city, started to kind of get a little social group and started attending some local groups, some of them that had to do with mental health advocacy. And I started to, by my standards, blossom a little bit. And that was amazing. That was almost like, what's going on? It was so different that it was almost like I would detach from myself, and kind of you're seeing yourself from a distance, because it's like, this is not my life. This is not what I've been doing. I'm not the kind of person who, goes and visits a friend and we're spending time on their porch or something. Like that was so foreign to me that it didn't seem real. So sometimes there was bad that came with the good. But the truth is I really pushed it a little too fast, because I didn't, I think I was just so burned out from the taper and from it was almost like recovery fatigue. I had just been so focused on coming off the medications and this healing journey that I was just almost tired of it, And I think maybe I pushed it a little too hard. It was too much too soon. And the way that my recovery has kind of been is just something where, maybe in some ways it follows the windows and waves pattern of stabilization. But the whole thing has just been getting better, then kind of getting worse a little bit, then, getting better again. And just over time, everything is slowly trending upwards. That's been the process, but it's just been a very, very long process. And it's been for various reasons. I've been off medications now for just over 10 years. And it's really taken, every bit of those 10 years, really, or most of them, to get to a point where I'm like, now I feel kind of like a person. I feel like, maybe I can kind of, at 40 years old, I can start to tackle, what I would have done in my 20s or something, like all that missed time. In some way, I can maybe start to make up for it as best I can. That's kind of where I'm at now. It's been a very, very long, gradual recovery. It was just, I think the way I would look at it is that when I was put on these medications when I was young, I mean, it was almost like psychiatry surgically implanting some kind of barbed nail into my brain, figuratively. And then the taper was done so fast, it was almost like just grabbing the head of that nail and ripping it out, barbs and all. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that and be okay. And so it really left me with a very messed up central nervous system. And it really has taken a long time to heal, especially when that's combined with all the traumas and things like that preceded the medications. And then that also happened while I was on them and because I was on them, and the taper itself, and being abandoned by psychiatry after they practically were almost like parents to me, growing up taking these medications. So there was a lot there that has had to be processed and worked through, and I'm continuing to do that to this day. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot there that I never got to address. And, so it's been about so much more than just the medications and the taper and even just psychiatry and all of that. Like there's just, it's been a whole process. Yeah.
You mentioned something interesting for this shift between your identity as a psychiatric patient who needs meds to being off them. And so I guess I'm going to ask you this question. Do you believe that you were psychiatrically ill? When you look back at things, do you think you have a psychiatric condition, some kind of, biological problem with you? Because I know you probably accumulated a range of diagnoses over the years. How do you understand your identity and diagnosis, after going through a journey like this?
That's a good question. I mean, as a person, I kind of feel rather amorphous. Like I still don't have a definite form. I think that's kind of just maybe part of that's just who I am anyway, because I think I've always had a little bit of a chameleon-like quality there anyway. But when it comes to all that kind of thing about, diagnoses and do I feel like there's something going on there, I would say what a lot of people in this community say, and that is I am still very diagnosable. I could get any number of diagnoses. I have no doubt about that, and some of them that I currently have would still stand. I'm sure anybody would diagnose me with OCD, maybe even with depression at times. I'm not, I tend to be on the melancholy side of things naturally. Maybe, of course, there could be some anxiety stuff. So, yeah, if I was in some kind of clinical environment where somebody wanted to diagnose me, I don't think there'd be anything that would stop that, if I submitted myself to that process. Now, do I actually feel that those things matter to me, that they're legitimate? To that, I say not really. To each their own. But to me, no, because what I went through was just, I came out of that whole experience feeling like 11 from Stranger Things, just without any superpowers, like some kind of lab rat. Like I really felt like they had just thrown everything at me and none of it worked. They didn't really know what they were doing. They just kind of thought, something's wrong. And this is how our framework tells us to view these problems. And then the person, me, got lost in all of that. And that was the conversation I had with my psychiatrist at 24, 25 years old. It's like, I've been on medications for so long, I don't even know what's wrong with me anymore. And he agreed. Like, how can we know? So it's really hard for me to validate all that and feel like, yeah, there's something going on there. I come from a dysfunctional family. Like I said earlier, there's enough problems there where, whether it's nature or nurture or whatever, I'm not going to be a completely normal, well-adjusted person. This is not the story of somebody who was doing just fine and then psychiatry came along. This isn't that story. This is a story much more complicated than that. But what I feel like with psychiatry is that, it's almost like I was just drowning in gasoline as a child, and then they came along and threw a match on it. Like they didn't really know what they were doing is how I feel about it. They just kind of made things worse. And maybe the finer point I can put on that is that, I needed to get out of that situation. I need to get away from home. I need to stay away from home, all those kinds of things. And the medications and psychiatry with what they were doing and how they were getting me to see myself through this DSM lens, it kind of just made it impossible for me to take off from the home launch pad. It's like I couldn't really get away from there, which is the opposite of what I needed. The medications were so potent and so sedating and caused so many side effects and so on that it suppressed my ambitions, my desires. Like I was just basically, my plane was grounded. Like I couldn't take off. So it's hard because of all those reasons. It's hard for me to really feel any kind of, give any kind of real meaning in my own life to any of the diagnoses that I received or could receive.
So I'm going to ask another question now, just to give people a sense of kind of where you are at the moment. what are the best things in your life at the moment, and what are the hardest things that you still struggle with?
Those are good questions. I think that one of the best things in my life at the moment would be, I feel like I'm very close to a place where I can kind of honor what the, late teens, early 20s year old real Russ would have wanted, and that's kind of starting to make my own way in life, have some freedom. I'm my first time solo traveling in another country now, like all these kinds of things that I could not have done while I was so medicated. And even, of course, during my taper and much of the post-taper period. Like I'm in this part now where it's like, yeah, I can honor that person who wanted so much more from life and never thought he was going to be able to get it because of his health, among other things. And I think that's one of the best parts of my life now. Now, accompanying that, it's also one of the scariest parts, because this is the part where it's like, okay, there's a lot of fear. It's like, okay, I'm in new situations, new environments. I am figuratively and literally far from home. It really tests you when you've, spent so much of your life believing in your limitations, which many of them may or may not have even been real. So that's very scary. And, when we talk about some of the negative stuff, the most difficult things, I think a lot of the most difficult things for me is really just, it's having been someone who got used to the same four walls every day. Who got used to being a shut-in, who got used to living such a small, confined life and not seeing enough of the outside world, only leaving the house to go to doctor's appointments and maybe a monthly trip to Best Buy. Being that person really did a number on me. And so much so that, combined with the hospitalizations and the therapeutic residential school, there's still a part of me that feels like I'm doing something wrong when I'm outside the house. Like somebody's going to come and just be like, oh, you're not supposed to be out here. Let's go bring you back in. There are some things from the past that still kind of have their hooks in me that I'm still, I'm working through. And I feel like it makes sense that these things would still be there, that I would be working through them. To me, that's not something that certainly ain't because there's just something wrong with my brain and how did that get there? Like, it makes perfect sense that I would have these things to work through. So, yeah, that would be the biggest positive. And then that kind of in some ways would be, I think, the biggest negative, unless something just slipped my mind. But yeah.
I know you mentioned before we got on you sort of casually mentioned in passing that you were in a relationship. What was that part of your life like, coming out of all of this? I mean, unless you were able to have relationships when you were sick and you were going through it, but maybe you could just speak about becoming romantically involved, with the world again after this. What has that been like?
It was like being back for the first time. I mean, honestly, there was no romance in my life prior to finishing the taper. I think I had a girlfriend when I was in third grade or something. You know what I mean? Like, we're discussing, hey, we're going to go to the same kid's birthday party. Great. Should we hold hands there? Awesome. That kind of stuff. And then there was nothing till I was 30. And, at 30 years old, when you start dating, it's almost like there are check boxes. There are these kinds of things that maybe aren't so much there when you're younger. Like, I think you have different priorities. So you're stepping into a world that feels in some ways much more adult oriented. It's much more for adults. So I don't know, maybe that took some of the fun out of it, because you kind of have to get real quick about some things. And, even for people in our community, by the time a lot of people get better, they've got to make a decision real fast about, okay, if I want to have a child, I need to kind of get on that because, we're getting older, we've lost a lot of time. So there are parts of it that are very serious when you start, when you're dating in your 30s and I'm sure 40s too. So it's been a mix of good and bad, but it was a lot for me to adjust to. And it's been very difficult because one of the most difficult things for me is just like living with another person, because I was living alone for so long. There are little things like that have been really hard for me. And even touch, things like that. Like, there's just been a lot to adjust to. And so, yeah, it's been wonderful too, because it's like, well, sharing your life with somebody else. just being able to be in love, being able to do little things that, aren't, maybe a lot of people move past those things, but being able to just hug another person, whenever you want, and when they can hug you, like even little things like that, even just reducing your stress levels through things like that can be immensely helpful. So it's been really magical, and it's been very real too. It's been there've been ups and downs, but it's been a process. And because of everything I'm going through, I've not engaged in dating like I could have. I've had 2 serious relationships since I was 30, and that's been it. Like, it's just been something where I've had to really slowly adjust to being in relationships, So that's, I probably could have answered your question in a more specific, focused way, but maybe that gives some kind of answer there.
Russ, I've asked you a lot of questions, and I can't think of additional ones at this time, but I want to turn it over to you. Do you have a message that you would like to share, or something that you would like to talk about, that you've learned from your journey and from, being involved in the de-prescribing space and talking about it? Yeah. Is there something that you want to share? Well,
I think what I really feel the most drawn to speak to, I don't even know if it's a specific person at a specific stage, but I think one thing I feel kind of drawn to just address for a moment is just, the hopelessness and despair that people feel. The aloneness, even the abandonment, and this even goes beyond tapering and the de-prescribing stuff. This is also just people who are still just taking a psych drug cocktail, and like me, when you're just made disabled by being on so much medication, and you just feel like you don't exist. You may have no friends. You may have, like me, no romantic life either. Like, you really are just a nobody, nowhere. Like, you feel like you're nothing. And I don't like to speak in a way where I'm promoting anything. So I'm not going to say to anybody, well, hey, look, coming off your medications is the answer, because that's absolutely, for a whole variety of reasons, something people have to think very carefully about before undertaking. But I just really, I think that's what I feel very strongly about, is people just not feeling so alone in what they're going through. And I think the message is that, we're not fated to live this way forever, and I think my life is a testament to that. It will take some things going your way, some timing, some help. It'll take drawing from inner resources that maybe you didn't even realize were there. But no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. You have yourself, even if yourself is buried underneath a ton of medication and diagnoses and whatever else, confusion, isolation. The real you is still there somewhere, and it can emerge someday. Whatever means, allow that to manifest. It can emerge someday. You will not lose yourself, and you will find yourself someday, and that will also bring others into your life too. So all the things that you're missing, you can and you will have. You can and you will have. Just have patience and just be easy on yourself, and just be kind and loving and compassionate towards yourself, and then you'll get there. You'll get there.
Great message. Russ, I love your YouTube channel. I was wondering if you could just plug it now and let people know where they can find you so they can hear your story. Russ has a great story. There's a lot more than what we discussed, and he's one of the most insightful people that I've found online, talking about their experience going through, polydrugging and coming out the other side. And so his channel is definitely worth checking out. Russ, how can they find you on social media?
Well, currently you can mainly just find me through the Russell B YouTube channel. You can just, I think, type in Russell B in the YouTube search bar. I think you'll see my face as a little icon there for the channel. I will probably add things at some point, and I'll certainly add more videos to my channel. So that's the main way right now. Hopefully in the future, there will be other ways to reach me, but they'll be listed on that channel. So the Russell B YouTube channel would be the main way right now.
And Russ, I also wonder if there's some people out there who may want to work with you through some type of coaching. I don't know if that's ever something that you've helped people do before. Do you help people with support going through psychiatric drug withdrawal? Is that can people reach out to you for that? And if so, how should they do that?
Yes, that's something that I have offered in the past in different forms. I used to do it in a very casual way with just video chats with people one-on-one. I've since realized that I have to do it in a more structured way and probably paid way. And so that will happen in the future. You can either watch my YouTube channel for an announcement on that, or you can send an email to Russell B. YT, YT for YouTube, Russell B. YT @gmail.com, and just ask to be put on the notification list for coaching or calls, just whatever it might be. Just ask to be put on the notification list, and then that way I can get back to you that way too. But yeah, that's it. Just look for an announcement there at some point in the future. Yeah, because you got to help. People need help. That's for sure.
Yeah. And they need help from good people like yourself. And so, well, Russell, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been really nice talking to you.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's invaluable, and the response that you're getting from people really shows that. I mean, yeah. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you very much for having me.
Russell discussed many important points today, but if I could highlight just one, it would be the significant risk of weight gain and diabetes on antipsychotics. It has been estimated that the lifespan of patients with schizophrenia is reduced by 10 to 20 years, with cardiovascular disease being the leading cause of death. Patients with schizophrenia are at a 3-fold higher risk of obesity and 2 to 4-fold higher risk of type 2 diabetes, both of which are common causes of cardiovascular disease. Several factors contribute to this increased risk, including smoking, inactivity, poor diet, low income, but most importantly, the antipsychotic treatments themselves. Second-generation antipsychotics carry a higher risk of causing metabolic side effects compared to the first-generation antipsychotics, and this can manifest as weight gain, excessive eating, increased blood sugar levels, insulin resistance, elevated triglycerides and cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes. In particular, the pediatric population is very vulnerable to metabolic side effects. For years, the risk of diabetes was primarily attributed to the weight gain caused by these drugs. However, recent research has shown that antipsychotics can impair glucose metabolism independently of weight gain. Essentially, weight gain and glucose dysregulation stem directly from the drug effect. If you're interested in learning more about how this happens, I've cited an article in the video's description that describes the mechanisms by which antipsychotics affect glucose metabolism at a cellular level. In summary, these drugs impair insulin signaling in your liver, skeletal muscle, and pancreas, which are the key players in glucose and insulin regulation. This can fast-track the body into type 2 diabetes at a much younger age than we typically see in the general population. Russell experienced these effects as a teenager, with rapid and significant weight gain of 150 pounds after starting Risperdal. By his early 20s, his weight had reached over 400 pounds, and he was taking medications for both diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Russell is not alone in his reaction to Risperdal, but there is variability in how people respond. While most individuals on antipsychotics will gain weight, and many may develop diabetes, Russell's extreme reaction could partially be due to a genetic predisposition. For instance, certain genetic polymorphisms result in structural differences in the 5-HT2C receptor, and they are associated with an increased risk of metabolic syndrome in patients treated with Risperdal, Clozaril, and Zyprexa. The downstream effects of this serotonin receptor influence feeding behavior and weight gain. In the spirit of informed consent and advocacy on this channel, I believe psychiatry has often failed to adequately communicate just how serious these metabolic risks are. In many cases, the metabolic effects are not addressed with the urgency they deserve, often being treated as secondary to the psychiatric illness. However, if cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in these patients, Perhaps it's time we broaden our perspective on treatment. Have you experienced weight gain or diabetes as a result of psychiatric medication? Please share your experience in the comments below. There's much more to cover on this topic, and so if there's anything specifically you'd like us to discuss, please leave a comment and we'll do our best to address it. Thank you for listening.